You've been told your thoughts are the problem, that you need to think positive, calm down, just breathe. But if that really worked, why does your mind still race at night? Why do you feel like you're sinking beneath waves of worry that never stop? Why do you wake up tired, even after sleeping? They lied. The world taught you to chase peace by fixing everything out there: the job, the money, the body, the relationship. But no one told you the real reason you suffer. It's the clinging to control, to identity, to fear, to the stories in your head that never stop repeating. Buddhism understood this over 2,000 years ago, that your anxiety isn't caused by life itself, but by how tightly you hold on to what you think life should be. And the most powerful medicine isn't more thinking, it's understanding emptiness, not the kind of emptiness that makes life meaningless, but the emptiness that sets you free. That shows you your thoughts are not facts, your fear is not truth, and peace isn't something you chase. It's what's left when you let go. Tonight, as you listen, something will shift. Your shoulders will relax. The storm in your chest will start to pass, and you'll feel something rare. Space. Space between you and the thoughts. Space to breathe, to rest, to just be. And when you wake up tomorrow, your problems might still be there, but you will be different. Still, clear, unmoved. A quiet mind in a loud world. This isn't just another audio, it's a doorway, a reset, a return to yourself. Are you ready to let go? Let's begin. You've made it here because you're looking for something deeper than a quick fix. You're tired of carrying the constant weight of self-judgment, the voice in your head that criticizes even the smallest mistake, that turns silence into shame and effort into never enough. That voice has been with you so long, you might think it is you, but it's not. And you're about to learn how to let it go. There is a path that doesn't involve fighting your thoughts or pretending to be okay. It's quiet, it's gentle, and it's powerful. It's called Metta Bhavana, loving kindness meditation. And once you understand how it works, something will begin to shift inside you, not with force, not with control, but with deep, quiet compassion, the kind you've been needing for years without knowing how to give it to yourself. In most people's minds, meditation seems like something peaceful and perfect. But if you've ever sat in silence, you know it isn't always that way. What rises up first is usually not peace, but pain, regret, insecurity, guilt. The inner critic rushes in, convinced it needs to speak first. And it's loud. But loving kindness doesn't try to argue with that voice. It doesn't debate or resist. It simply speaks a different language, one of care, of warmth, of acceptance. This practice trains your mind to respond to pain the way a loving friend would. And slowly, that cruel, cold voice begins to lose its power. It starts with a phrase, a whisper in your mind, not of shame, but of kindness. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. At first, these words might feel foreign, maybe even fake. You might say them with tightness in your chest, with doubt, even with anger. But that's okay. Metta doesn't require you to believe the words. It only asks you to keep saying them gently, over and over, because the act of speaking kindly to yourself is already healing, even if you can't feel it yet. Think of it like tending to a wound. You don't need to believe the bandage will work. You only need to apply it and give it time. These phrases are the bandage for the invisible wounds you've carried for far too long. Now, let's understand the critic. It often sounds like protection, like it's trying to prevent failure or embarrassment, but underneath its sharpness is fear. Fear of not being good enough, of being left behind, of being unlovable. The inner critic is loud because it believes that by being hard on you, it can keep you safe. But you don't need that kind of safety anymore. You need softness. You need care. You need a new voice, one that says, "I see you're trying. That's enough." This is what Metta Bhavana teaches. Not self-improvement, but self-acceptance. Not fixing, but holding. Start by sitting with your eyes closed and your breath soft. Place your hand on your heart if that feels okay. Begin to say the phrases slowly. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. Say them gently, even if they feel hollow. Each time you speak them, you are planting seeds. Some part of your mind is listening, and though you may not notice it today, the soil is shifting. There is no need to force emotion. Loving kindness doesn't require you to feel love immediately. It only asks for the intention, the willingness to care even a little. You may feel resistance. You may hear the critic saying, "This is pointless. You don't deserve this. Who are you to wish yourself happiness?" But that's the very reason to continue, because that voice has ruled for too long. Over time, something else begins to emerge. You notice small changes, a softer edge to your thoughts, a pause before judgment, a sense that you are no longer at war with yourself. This is not magic. It's practice, and this practice deepens. Once you've spent time offering these phrases to yourself, the circle of care begins to expand, not because you're trying to be good, but because compassion, once awakened, naturally spreads. You begin to say the phrases for someone you love. May they be safe. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they live with ease. Then someone neutral, then someone difficult. Not to forgive their harm, but to stop holding it, to stop letting pain multiply in your own mind. But it starts, and must start, with you. Metta is especially powerful for those of us who grew up in homes where love was conditional, where affection was earned, where perfection was praised, but vulnerability was punished. That environment trains the inner critic to thrive. It teaches us that kindness is a reward, not a right. Loving kindness meditation retrains that response. It gives you the kindness you needed back then, right now. Not through memory, but through repetition. Through the daily act of reminding your nervous system, you are safe, you are enough. And this changes how you move through the world. You stop needing other people to give you what you can finally give to yourself. You become less reactive, less desperate for approval, less terrified of mistakes. Not because the fear is gone, but because you've learned how to meet it with compassion instead of punishment. That doesn't mean the critic vanishes overnight. It will return during stress, failure, uncertainty. But each time, you'll have a new response. Instead of collapsing into shame, you'll breathe. You'll return to the phrases, and you'll remember, this voice is old. This pain is not the truth. You'll realize that the critic is just a sound, a reflex, and you are not required to obey it. Many people ask if Metta Bhavana is selfish. They wonder, how can I wish happiness for myself when the world is hurting? But here's the truth. Only those who care for themselves can truly care for others without resentment or burnout. Loving kindness begins with you, so it can move through you. You will notice this when someone disappoints you and you no longer take it so personally. When someone criticizes you and you don't crumble. When you fail at something and instead of spiraling, you say, "That was hard, and I'm still worthy." These are not small shifts. They are signs of inner freedom. In this practice, consistency matters more than intensity. 10 minutes a day is enough. You don't need candles or silence or perfection. You just need a willingness to be with yourself as you are. On some days, the words will feel warm and comforting. On others, they'll feel flat or frustrating. Keep going. The critic has had years of practice, so give yourself permission to keep practicing too. Eventually, the voice inside you changes. It becomes more like a companion than a judge. A voice that says, "You're doing your best." A voice that rests beside you when you're in pain instead of blaming you for it. This is not wishful thinking. It's the result of rewiring your attention, your emotions, and your beliefs, all through the repetition of a simple, quiet wish. There are deeper layers too. As you continue, you begin to notice the difference between your true awareness and your conditioned mind. The critic is part of the conditioned mind, built from years of judgment, culture, media, and fear. But beneath that, there's something untouched, something aware, present, calm. Metta helps you connect to that part of you, not to escape pain, but to be with it without collapsing, without clinging, without needing it to go away before you can be okay. You'll start to feel the space between the thought and the truth, between the feeling and your identity. You'll notice the critics say, "You're a failure," and you'll respond with, "That's a thought, not a fact." And that space is freedom, not dramatic, not loud, but steady, real. Over time, you begin to realize that self-compassion isn't weakness, it's resilience. The ability to sit with your own pain without turning it into a weapon, to face yourself honestly and still say, "May I be free from suffering." Not because you're perfect, but because you're human. And perhaps the most beautiful effect of all, when others are hurting, you'll be able to stay present. Because you've practiced staying present with your own suffering, you've built that muscle. And now, when someone else is drowning in their critic, you'll be the one who says, "It's okay, you're still worthy." All because you learned how to say that to yourself. This is the quiet power of loving kindness. It doesn't need noise, it doesn't need proof. It doesn't wait for you to fix your life first. It begins now, exactly as you are, with a breath, with a whisper. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. And maybe for the first time in your life, the voice that answers back is kind. And slowly, the voice softens, not just for a moment, but in the spaces where self-judgment used to live. Something opens. You don't rush to blame yourself anymore. You pause, you breathe, you respond instead of react. This shift isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle, but it's real. Now, a deeper understanding begins to form. As your heart grows quieter, your mind begins to reveal its patterns more clearly. What you once thought were random moments of stress, distraction, or inner chaos begin to show themselves as something far more structured. The Buddha called them the 5 hindrances, and when you learn to see them clearly, the confusion in your mind starts to lose its grip. Every moment of anxiety you've felt, every restless day, every foggy night spent overthinking or shutting down, they all fall into these 5 categories. These aren't abstract ideas. They're deeply human experiences, ancient names, but modern truths. If you've ever wanted a map of your mental landscape, this is it. Not just a list of problems, but a pathway through them. The first hindrance is sensual desire. At first, it doesn't sound like a problem. The world even encourages it. More pleasure, more comfort, more escape. But this isn't about healthy joy. It's about craving. The endless reaching towards something that promises peace, but never delivers. When anxiety arises, the mind often grabs onto something. Food, scrolling, planning, shopping, fantasizing. The relief is short. The tension always returns. Sensual desire in this context is the constant movement of mind toward, what if I just had this? The nervous system believes pleasure will end discomfort, but it only hides it temporarily. The deeper issue isn't pleasure, it's attachment. It's the belief that satisfaction is always one step away, so the mind never rests. It seeks, then seeks more. When you recognize this craving in the body, the leaning forward, the tightness in the jaw, the urgent hunger for something, you interrupt the cycle. You turn toward it, gently, and acknowledge it. Ah, this is wanting. This is the hunger for escape. The craving doesn't vanish, but it loses its illusion. And without illusion, it holds no power. You return to presence, not with force, but with understanding. The second hindrance is ill will. This one disguises itself cleverly. It wears the mask of justice, of sharp thinking, even of self-protection. But underneath, it is the slow poison of aversion, a pushing away of what is. It can sound like anger, but it also speaks in subtle tones, irritation, resentment, harshness. Toward others, yes, but most often toward yourself. Anxiety often hides in ill will, the tension of not wanting to feel what's present, the desperate attempt to fight reality. You tell yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this, and the conflict grows. You turn away from discomfort, and in doing so, you give it strength. Aversion does not remove pain, it doubles it. The path through this hindrance is not pretending to like what hurts, it's softening the pushback. It's acknowledging pain without adding rejection. This is difficult. I'm not failing for feeling this. I can stay with it. When the heart opens to discomfort, not with agreement but with compassion, ill will weakens. Not overnight, but breath by breath, reaction by response. You start to see that anger is often sadness with armor. That frustration is fear that hasn't been held, and slowly the heat cools. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor, often misunderstood as laziness, but it's something deeper. It's heaviness of mind, numbness, the fog that settles in when life feels too much. In anxiety, this shows up as shutdown, the retreat into scrolling, sleep, disconnection, not out of rest, but out of escape. The body may be still, but the mind is drowning. It feels like emptiness, but it's actually a form of suffering. The danger here is subtle, because the world often praises stillness. But not all stillness is peace. Some of it is paralysis. When sloth takes over, there's a forgetting of life, a shrinking back from effort, from care, from wakefulness. The path through this is not pushing harder. It's lighting a small inner flame. It's noticing gently the moment of collapse, naming it without shame. This is withdrawal. This is the mind trying to protect me by numbing out. You respond not with pressure, but with presence. A small movement, a breath, opening the window, standing in the sun. Just enough light to break the spell. Torpor fades not through shame, but through reawakening the senses, through remembering that you are still here and still capable of meeting the next moment with care. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. This one is loud. It speaks fast. It thinks in spirals. It makes lists, then rewrites them. It checks, then checks again. It pretends to be solving problems, but underneath it is panic in disguise. In modern life, this hindrance is everywhere, in constant notifications, in productivity pressure, in the way we glorify busyness. But beneath it all, there is fear, the fear of stopping. Restlessness rises when silence begins. It fills stillness with noise. It avoids presence by creating movement, mental or physical. The body gets tight. The breath shortens. The mind runs. And what's underneath is often a sense of being unsafe in stillness. The solution is not control, it's curiosity. You begin to ask, what am I running from? What would I feel if I stopped? That question opens the door. Worry is a habit, not a helper. It feels productive, but it rarely resolves anything. It just burns energy. You interrupt it by anchoring the mind in sensation. Feet on the floor, air on the skin, sound in the room. You return to the simplicity of the moment, not because it's exciting, but because it's real. And realness is where safety begins. The fifth hindrance is doubt. The most dangerous, not because it's loud, but because it sounds so reasonable. Doubt questions everything, including the path itself. It whispers, is this really helping? What if you're wasting time? What if nothing works? Doubt is not the same as curiosity. Curiosity is open. Doubt is paralyzing. This hindrance attacks your confidence, your worth, your capacity. It makes you second-guess your efforts. It breeds hesitation. In anxiety, it often shows up as indecision, endless research, fear of choosing wrong, fear of trusting your experience. Doubt doesn't offer insight. It offers paralysis dressed up as intelligence. To meet this hindrance, you must respond not with argument, but with steadiness. You name the doubt. You don't get pulled into its stories. You say, this is the voice of uncertainty. It is not the end of the path. It is part of the path. You come back to what's real. Breath, body, ground. Not to fix doubt, but to move beside it, to walk forward, even when the voice says, are you sure? That is strength, not being certain, but moving anyway, with presence. All 5 hindrances are not enemies. They are teachers. They arise in every mind. They are not proof of failure. They are invitations to wake up, to notice, to return, not once, but 1,000 times. Each return builds strength. Each return makes the mind clearer. The Buddha never promised a life free from struggle. He offered a path through it, a path of seeing clearly, meeting gently and choosing wisely. The 5 hindrances are not random. They are precise. They show you exactly where you are stuck and how to unstick yourself. When you understand sensual desire, you stop chasing what never satisfies. When you understand ill will, you stop fighting what's already here. When you understand sloth, you remember your own spark. When you understand restlessness, you rediscover stillness. When you understand doubt, you reclaim your trust. And none of this is theory. It's practice. Each time you sit, breathe, and watch your mind, you are learning. You are seeing these patterns in real time, and through that seeing, you gain freedom, not by force, but by clarity. This is how anxiety begins to lose its grip, not by being fixed, but by being fully understood. Anxiety is not your enemy. It's your nervous system trying to protect you in ways it doesn't yet know how to stop. The hindrances give you a language for what's happening. They shine a light on the patterns, and once you see clearly, you are no longer trapped. This is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming aware. And awareness is what transforms everything. When you can meet your craving with compassion, your anger with understanding, your fatigue with curiosity, your restlessness with grounding, and your doubt with patience, something shifts. You stop being overwhelmed by the mind and you start to care for it. This is the beginning of true healing, not escaping your thoughts, but holding them gently, watching them rise and knowing you don't have to follow, watching them fall and knowing you are still whole. The path is here, in the body, in the breath, in this exact moment. And with every hindrance that arises, there is an equal opportunity to return. That is the real power, not never falling, but learning how to rise again and again with kindness, with clarity, with the steady heart of someone who has stopped running. You are not broken for struggling, you are human for feeling, and you are free the moment you stop believing everything your mind says. The hindrances will visit. Let them come. Let them go, and in their coming and going, you'll discover what was never hindered, your calm, your clarity, your courage to begin again. And so, the mind becomes clearer. The shadows that once seemed overwhelming are now seen for what they are, habits, not truths. The 5 hindrances no longer control from the dark. You've seen their patterns, you've named them, and that is how they begin to dissolve. But even after that clarity, pain still comes. Thoughts still bite. Old stories still replay. The past doesn't disappear. And in those moments, it's easy to fall back, to resist, to wish the pain away. But there's another way. One that doesn't fight or flee, one that doesn't push the pain down, but meets it fully. This next teaching isn't soft. It's not comfortable. But it's one of the most powerful teachings the Buddha ever gave. And it holds the key to a deeper kind of peace. This teaching is known as the simile of the saw. The Buddha once told his monks, even if bandits were to capture you and saw through your limbs with a 2-handled saw, if you gave rise to anger even then, you would not be following my teaching. It wasn't a metaphor meant to shock, it was meant to wake something up, a truth that most of us never get taught. True freedom isn't found in controlling what happens to you. It's found in not letting it control your heart. Mental suffering often feels like being attacked from within. not by others, but by thoughts, by memories, by the echo of voices that said you weren't enough. The cutting doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside the mind, and every time we retaliate against our own pain, we make the wound deeper. The simile of the saw is not about being passive, it's not about tolerating harm, it's about recognizing the most important choice we have, not whether suffering arises, but whether we turn it into more suffering. When we meet pain with resistance, we feed it. When we meet it with hatred, we let it shape us. But when we meet it with radical acceptance, we break the cycle. Acceptance doesn't mean approval, it doesn't mean giving up. It means this. Right now, this is what's here. I don't have to like it, but I will not add to it. That is strength. That is power. And it's a skill you can train, one moment at a time. Mental pain takes many forms. Sometimes it's a voice that says you're a failure. Sometimes it's a surge of shame after a small mistake. Sometimes it's grief that never got to finish. These experiences cut deep, and the reflex is to fight, to shut them down, argue with them, distract yourself, escape. But the fight keeps the wound open. When pain arises, the first step is to pause, to notice what the mind is doing. Is it attacking? Is it defending? Is it trying to numb out? That pause is not weakness, it's awareness, and awareness is what creates choice. In that space, you begin to notice that the pain is not personal. It may feel personal. It may wear your voice, your memories, your history, but it is not who you are. It is something arising in awareness. It is a wave. You are the ocean. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not pretending things are okay when they're not. This is meeting what's true without letting it steal your peace. Sometimes, mental suffering comes as repeated thoughts, over and over, the same sentence, the same fear, the same regret. Like a saw going back and forth, each time it returns, it stings. You start to believe the only solution is to silence it. But thought suppression never works. It just moves the pain into deeper layers of the mind. The simile of the saw offers a different approach. Let the thought come, let the pain rise, but do not let it take your kindness with it. This might sound impossible, but it is something that becomes real through practice. When the thought arises, I'm worthless, I'll never be enough, no one cares, you don't argue with it, you don't run. You say, this is pain, this is suffering, but I do not have to add hatred to it. You breathe, you soften the body, you let the thought pass through like a cloud passing through an open sky, and you hold the space around it with compassion. One of the greatest misunderstandings about radical acceptance is that it means doing nothing. That couldn't be further from the truth. It is one of the most active, courageous things you can do. It means choosing not to attack yourself when you're already hurting. It means choosing not to turn pain into poison. The mind might say, but I can't accept this. Even that is okay. You can accept the resistance. Acceptance includes everything, even the parts of you that resist. In this practice, there's no pressure to do it perfectly. There's no rule that says you must feel peace. The invitation is to stop escalating, to stop adding the second layer of suffering, the shame, the guilt, the inner violence. The pain may still be there, but you are no longer fueling it. This teaching also helps with how we treat others. When someone lashes out, when someone speaks from their own pain, we often feel the urge to retaliate, to correct them, to defend ourselves. But just like with our own thoughts, this only deepens the suffering. Non-retaliation is not about weakness. It's about refusing to let someone else's pain decide your response. When you respond with presence instead of reactivity, you change the pattern. You stop the cycle from passing through you into someone else. You become a mirror that reflects wisdom instead of war. This doesn't mean staying in harmful situations. It doesn't mean staying silent when boundaries are crossed. It means you speak with clarity, not vengeance. You act with wisdom, not rage. You protect with strength, not with cruelty. And the same applies to your relationship with yourself. Every time a painful memory returns, you have this choice: to attack yourself or to hold yourself, to believe the story or to see the pain beneath it, to become the voice of suffering or to become the space that allows healing. That space, the one that sees without judgment, is what mindfulness cultivates. It is what every breath brings you closer to, and over time, that space becomes your home. The mind may still move, pain may still come, but you are no longer caught inside it. You are aware. You are steady. This is not detachment. This is not coldness. This is warmth that doesn't need to prove itself. A quiet strength that refuses to add harm where there's already pain. One of the most beautiful effects of this practice is that it changes the inner dialogue. The mind that once punished you for feeling becomes the mind that comforts. The part of you that once screamed now speaks gently. The inner war fades, not because life became easier, but because you stopped adding weapons to the battlefield. This teaching, if practiced, can change how you experience everything: grief, fear, anger, failure. It becomes less about escaping pain and more about relating to it in a new way, not as an enemy, not as a test, but as something that can be met, held, and allowed to pass. Radical acceptance is not giving in. It's giving up the fantasy that things must be different before you can be okay. It's the power to say, even this belongs. Even now, I can be kind. You'll notice this most during difficult moments. When the mind wants to tighten, you breathe. When judgment rises, you soften. When the old story returns, you don't chase it. You recognize it, bow to it, and let it move through. Sometimes this practice feels like doing nothing, but it is doing the most important thing of all, refusing to become the pain that visits you. You are not your worst thoughts. You are the one who sees them, who breathes with them, who doesn't collapse into them. That awareness is where freedom lives. Not far away, not in a perfect version of you, but here, in the quiet strength of your own heart. The Buddha's simile wasn't about physical violence. It was about how we meet life. Life will cut, thoughts will sting, people will misunderstand, but your mind does not have to burn. There is a kind of peace that is unshakable, not because it avoids life, but because it embraces life fully. And that peace begins every time you choose presence over punishment. This is not a one-time decision. It is a path, a practice, and each moment you choose it, something inside you changes. You become the kind of person who doesn't turn away from pain, your own or anyone else's. Not because you enjoy it, but because you know you can face it. This is what it means to walk the middle path, to stay close to what hurts without turning it into harm, to hold yourself through the storm, to say, without words, I am still here, I will not run, I will not fight, I will stay. And in that staying, you discover something the pain could never touch. Stillness, courage, compassion that does not shake. And from that place, the next moment arrives, not as a problem to fix, but as a part of life to meet with open eyes and a steady heart. This is the way, not away from suffering, but through it. Not by fighting it, but by no longer letting it define you. And the more you walk this path, the more you remember. You were never broken, only waiting to come home. And then there is a silence deeper than quiet, the kind that doesn't come from shutting out the world, but from no longer reacting to it. You feel it after you've stopped resisting your own pain, after you've chosen not to fight the thoughts that once ruled you. That inner stillness doesn't need conditions. It doesn't depend on fixing or changing anything. It simply reveals itself when the inner storm settles. But how do you stay there? How do you remain grounded when life starts moving again? How do you keep the calm without gripping it, without turning peace into another goal? The answer is more intimate than any belief and more immediate than any philosophy. It begins with the breath, not the one you control, but the one that's always been breathing you. There is a practice, simple on the surface, yet endlessly deep. Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. It's not about deep breathing or making your breath perfect. It's not about forcing your mind to be still. This is the subtle art of letting the breath breathe itself, and you learning how to be with it, just as it is. In a world that teaches control as safety, Anapanasati is a return to trust, a return to the body, a return to the present without needing to shape it. When you sit and bring attention to the breath, the mind usually does something immediately. It tries to adjust the breath, fix it, make it better. The practice begins by noticing that impulse, the need to interfere, and then choosing to step back, letting the body do what it already knows how to do, breathing. The breath doesn't need your help, but your attention, gentle, non-controlling, brings you into harmony with something more stable than thought. Thoughts jump. Breath stays. Thoughts spin stories. Breath stays neutral. It rises and falls like the tide, like the wind through trees. Each cycle is a reminder. Life moves on its own. At first, this may feel boring. The mind wants stimulation. It wants progress. But boredom is just resistance in disguise, a discomfort with stillness. Staying with the breath teaches the mind a new way of relating, not through chasing or fixing, but through allowing. And allowing is where peace grows. Each breath is slightly different. Some are short, some are long, some feel full, others barely register. The practice is not about making them equal, it's about noticing without judgment. When you become the witness instead of the controller, the breath begins to show you things, your state of mind, the tension in the body, the quality of your presence. The breath becomes a mirror. When attention is settled on the breath, the nervous system begins to shift. The body relaxes, muscles let go, the heart rate slows. And this isn't a forced calm, it's the natural result of meeting experience without adding pressure. The more gently you stay with the breath, the more the mind learns safety in stillness. Distraction will happen. That's not a mistake. The key is how you return, not with frustration, not with judgment, but with the same softness the breath offers. You notice you've wandered and you come back. That return is the practice. That kindness is what changes the brain. Every time you return, you teach your mind that peace is always available, not by arriving somewhere new, but by returning to what was never lost. As this continues, the breath begins to deepen on its own, not because you made it, but because tension fades when attention is gentle. The breath moves in and out like a wave, and slowly you begin to experience it not just in the nose or chest, but through the whole body. A full body breathing, aliveness from crown to toes. The body no longer feels separate. It becomes unified. At this stage, effort changes. You no longer chase the breath. You rest in it. You no longer focus tightly. You soften into awareness. It's like floating instead of swimming. And this shift from doing to being is where equanimity starts to grow. Not the numb kind, but the kind that doesn't cling to pleasant or run from unpleasant. A balance that can hold joy and sadness in the same breath. Anapanasati is not about becoming blank. It's about becoming clear. You start to see how thought arises and fades, how emotion moves like weather, how everything comes and goes, but awareness stays. The breath is your anchor, not to trap you, but to keep you from drifting into old patterns. This practice is also a training in patience. The mind wants results. It wants to measure progress, but breath doesn't care about progress. It teaches presence, not performance. Some days, attention will be stable. Other days, it will scatter. Both are part of the journey. The breath teaches you to meet yourself as you are, not as you wish to be. When you stay with the breath long enough, something unexpected happens. You begin to sense that the breath is not something you are doing. It's just happening. You're not breathing. You're being breathed. Life is moving through you. This realization is small on the surface, but profound in effect. It loosens the grip of ego. The sense of being the controller softens. There's no need to force anything. There's just awareness and breath and stillness. In this space, the mind begins to let go of chasing. You don't need to fix every thought. You don't need to change every emotion. You don't need to solve your whole life in one sitting. You just return, again and again. And with each return, the depth of presence grows. Eventually, the breath becomes so subtle, it barely feels like anything is happening. But awareness stays. This is not dullness. This is clarity without content. A quiet mind that is not shut down, but wide open. In this stillness, insight can arise, not forced, not searched for, but revealed. You begin to understand things not with logic, but with direct seeing. The nature of impermanence, the nature of self, the nature of peace. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this practice is how it begins to shape daily life. You notice your breath while walking, while speaking, while waiting. It becomes a friend, a reminder. When anger stirs, you breathe. When fear rises, you return. When joy arrives, you stay. The breath is always there, steady, quiet, offering a way back. Anapanasati also opens the door to deep emotional healing. When grief surfaces, the breath is a place to rest. When shame rises, the breath is a space that doesn't judge. The breath holds all of you. It doesn't require you to be calm to return to it. It meets you where you are, every time. There's no finish line here, no final breath that completes the journey. It is a path of deepening, not arriving, and every moment is a new beginning. A new chance to stay, to soften, to open. Some teachings say that watching the breath leads to joy, then tranquility, then stillness, then insight. But these are not steps to chase. They are experiences that unfold naturally when effort dissolves, when control softens into trust, when attention becomes gentle enough to hold even the subtlest experience without fear. This is what the breath teaches. Not just how to be calm, but how to be free. Free from the need to escape the moment. Free from the belief that peace is somewhere else. Free from the habit of pushing, pulling, grasping. When you let the breath breathe you, you stop trying to manage life. You begin to experience it directly, without filters, without resistance. Just the rise, the fall, the quiet space in between. In that space, something timeless opens. A stillness that doesn't belong to you, but includes you. A peace that cannot be owned, but can be lived. And in that peace, you remember who you are beneath all the stories. Aware, present, unshaken. No thought can give you this. No achievement can match this. It is the gift that breath brings every moment, if you're willing to stop reaching and simply receive. This is the subtle art, the great undoing. Not doing more, but doing less, until only presence remains, and in that presence there is nothing missing, nothing to fix, only this breath and the next. And it is enough. And so the breath becomes home, a place where nothing needs to be added or removed, where presence lives without needing perfection, where stillness no longer feels like emptiness, but something full and deeply alive. But beneath that calm surface, something subtle remains, a tension that's harder to name. Even when the body is relaxed and the breath flows easily, there is often a hidden pull, a sense of self needing to defend, compare, protect, or prove something. This layer doesn't always speak loudly. It sits in the background. It shapes thoughts and colors emotions. It drives anxiety in ways that feel normal, yet deeply unsettling. This is where the teachings on the fetters begin to make sense. The fetters, according to the Buddha, are not chains around your feet. They're the inner bonds that keep the mind tied to suffering. They're not physical, but their impact is real. They influence how you see yourself, how you relate to the world, and how you respond to the unknown. Understanding them doesn't just explain your anxiety. It shows you how to release it at the root. The first is the belief in a fixed self. This isn't just philosophical. It affects how you respond to failure, to rejection, to uncertainty. When you hold tightly to an idea of who you are, smart, successful, strong, spiritual, anything that threatens that identity becomes a source of fear. Even small setbacks feel personal. Thoughts like, "I should be beyond this," or "this isn't me," come from the illusion that you are a solid, unchanging thing. But when that belief softens, experience becomes lighter. Pain is still pain, but it's no longer yours. It's just what's passing through. The second is doubt. Not the open curiosity kind, but the paralyzing kind. The kind that tells you to stop trying, that whispers you're not doing it right, that questions the practice, the path, your own worth. This isn't healthy skepticism. It's the mind trying to stay in control by never committing. Doubt creates anxiety by feeding endless loops of uncertainty. It keeps the heart half closed. The way through is not to argue with doubt, but to move anyway, to practice even when unsure, to stay when the mind says flee. Trust isn't a feeling, it's a direction. Next is attachment to rites and rituals. This doesn't mean ceremonies are bad. It points to the mind's habit of thinking peace can only come from doing things a certain way. It's the voice that says, "I didn't meditate perfectly today, so it doesn't count," or "I missed a day, now I've failed." This attachment turns practice into pressure. It turns freedom into performance. But liberation doesn't depend on appearances. It depends on how fully you meet the present. Letting go of this attachment allows practice to become something lived, not performed. Something honest, not rigid. As the path deepens, subtler fetters arise. There is craving, not just for things, but for experiences. Craving for peace, for bliss, for certainty. The mind tries to recreate the last moment of stillness, and in doing so, leaves the present. This type of craving hides beneath spiritual effort. It's wanting the fruits of practice while resisting the patience it requires. The way out isn't through suppression. It's through seeing how craving adds weight to everything. When the craving is seen clearly, the grasping loosens. The heart remembers how to rest. Alongside craving is aversion, the rejection of discomfort. This can take the form of irritability, judgment, or subtle tightening when something unpleasant arises. It's the mental habit of pushing away anything that doesn't match your idea of peace. But peace that depends on conditions isn't peace. True freedom includes the whole range of experience. When aversion is met with kindness, it starts to lose its force. It no longer needs to be believed. It can be noticed, held, and allowed to pass without punishment. There is also the attachment to form, the subtle clinging to meditation experiences, identities, and even insights. This shows up as pride in progress or fear of losing what's been gained. It's the feeling of, I've reached something, I must protect it. But anything that needs defending is not stable. True understanding doesn't cling. It lets things arise and pass without ownership. Releasing attachment to form doesn't mean abandoning practice. It means practicing without ego, without needing proof. Further along the path comes restlessness. Not just the obvious fidgeting, but deep unease. The sense that something still isn't right, that you haven't done enough, that you're missing something. This restlessness fuels endless seeking. It makes silence uncomfortable and movement addictive. But when you stop chasing, restlessness reveals its root, the discomfort with simply being. By staying present through it, the urgency fades, the body softens, awareness expands, and restlessness, once seen, becomes stillness. Then comes conceit, not arrogance, but comparison, the constant measuring of yourself against others. Am I ahead or behind? Am I more awakened or less? This mindset keeps you separate. It feeds anxiety by turning life into a competition. Even spiritual practice becomes a race. But the path is not linear. It's personal, intimate, alive. There's nothing to win, nothing to prove. When you drop comparison, connection returns with others, with the moment, with your own heart. Next is the subtle craving for existence, wanting to be someone, somewhere, something. It's the belief that fulfillment lies in becoming, in being seen, known, valued. This craving hides in goals, dreams, even good intentions. It keeps the future always slightly more important than the now. But peace isn't found in becoming. It's found in being. Letting go of this craving doesn't mean apathy. It means releasing the belief that your worth depends on achievement. Finally, there is the craving for non-existence, the wish to disappear, to escape. In anxiety, this often appears as shutdown, avoidance, even despair. It's the thought that if I could just stop existing for a while, the pain would go away. This isn't weakness. It's suffering that hasn't found a way to speak. The way through isn't in suppressing this feeling, but in listening to it with deep compassion. To let it be heard, not followed. Healing begins not by erasing the pain, but by refusing to believe it means you're broken. The fetters are not foreign. They are familiar. They shape the internal world of almost every anxious thought, every rigid belief, every attempt to fix what was never wrong. They keep you spinning in patterns that feel like safety, but are really avoidance. Understanding them brings clarity. Seeing how they work gives you space. And that space is where freedom lives. What's powerful about this teaching is that it's not just a theory. It's a map. A way to name what's been confusing. A way to recognize that what you're feeling is part of a shared human struggle. That your anxiety is not a personal failure, but a universal experience seen clearly by the Buddha thousands of years ago. And just as the fetters are shared, so is the path that frees you from them. Each moment of mindfulness loosens their grip. Every time you return to presence instead of spiraling into thought, one strand weakens. Every breath taken without judgment, every feeling met without reaction, every day lived without the need to prove anything. It all adds up. This is not perfection. It's process. It's not sudden. It's gradual, but it's real. And with every step, identity becomes lighter. Fear becomes less defining. The self becomes less of a cage. Not because it's erased, but because it's no longer clung to. You stop needing to be a fixed thing. You become more like the breath, present, changing, free. This freedom doesn't mean you no longer feel. It means you no longer fight your feelings. You allow experience to rise and fall. You allow joy without needing to hold it. You allow pain without needing to fix it. You meet life with a heart that is steady, open, awake. And as each fetter breaks, the mind becomes more quiet. Not because nothing's happening, but because nothing needs to be controlled. The anxiety that once felt like a storm becomes a passing wind. The fear that once felt like identity becomes a signal, seen, understood, not obeyed. This is what liberation means. Not floating above life, but meeting life without clinging. Walking with presence, breathing without fear, being without needing to become. And it all begins here, not in some distant future, but in the willingness to see clearly, to let go slowly, and to live gently. There is no rush. There is no race. There is only now. And in now, you are already enough. Already on the path. Already unfolding. Breath by breath. Fetter by fetter. Thought by thought. Unbound. And when the mind loosens its grip on identity, when you are no longer shaped by the urge to be someone or to disappear completely, something else rises from the silence. You start to see clearly how temporary everything truly is. Not just the thoughts and emotions, but the body, the people around you, your roles, your stories, all of it. This isn't a sad realization, it's a doorway. The things you clung to so tightly begin to feel lighter. You see that fear was rooted not just in needing control, but in denying one simple fact. Everything changes, and one day, everything ends. And yet, this ending is not a punishment. It's a teacher. Perhaps the most honest one we'll ever meet. Buddhist cemetery contemplations, known as Maranasati practices, were not created to disturb or shock. They weren't meant to make life feel bleak or empty. They were designed to wake the heart. To point directly at the truth that most of us quietly avoid every day, that we are going to die, that everyone we know will die, that this life, in all its intensity and noise, will pass, not someday, but definitely. And this truth, when turned toward with full attention, holds a strange kind of peace. Anxiety feeds on the illusion of control. It loops around what might happen, what must be prevented, what should be held together. But death is the ultimate end to control, and because of that, death contemplation breaks the illusion. It doesn't take your fear and try to comfort it. It walks straight into fear's house and turns on the light. In early Buddhist tradition, monks were instructed to meditate in charnel grounds, places where the dead were placed in the open air. They would sit with corpses in various stages of decay, not as an act of morbid fascination, but to study the truth of impermanence directly, to see clearly what the body becomes, and to understand this, too, is what I will become. Each stage was contemplated: the bloated body, the discolored skin, the body picked apart by animals, the bones scattered, the bones bleached by the sun, the bones turning to dust. And the phrase they repeated was, "This body of mine is of the same nature. It will be like that. It cannot escape it." Not in despair, but with clarity. This practice was not only about death, it was about seeing through delusion. The delusion that the body will always serve you, that youth is permanent, that health is guaranteed. When you see through this, priorities shift. You stop wasting time on shallow things. You speak more honestly. You let go of comparisons. You live more fully, not in denial of death, but because of it. Anxiety often arises from fear of loss. But when you accept that loss is already built into the nature of things, the mind starts to let go. Not in numbness, not in hopelessness, in freedom. When you no longer expect life to give you permanence, you stop suffering when it doesn't. Cemetery contemplation helps soften the grip on self-image. The endless tension to look a certain way, maintain appearances, preserve status. When you realize this body will rot and vanish, the need to impress loses power. It's not about giving up on care or dignity. It's about shifting your attention to what truly matters: connection, honesty, presence. Some people fear that thinking about death will lead to anxiety, but running from death quietly feeds it. Death doesn't cause fear, denial does. When you bring death into awareness gently, something unexpected happens. The mind begins to settle, because now it's living in reality, and reality is less frightening than pretending. When you sit with the truth of death, the small things stop owning you. The petty arguments, the status games, the obsessive planning, they lose their weight. Death reveals what's real, what's worth your energy, what's worth your attention. You stop rushing toward the future and start listening to the moment. There is also compassion in this practice. When you reflect on your own death, it becomes easier to forgive others, to understand that they too are temporary, that the person who wronged you, who triggered you, who disappointed you, they will die, just like you. And suddenly, the anger doesn't seem so necessary. You stop needing revenge. You stop needing to win. You begin to let go. This practice also helps prepare for the unknown. The mind wants certainty, but death is the one thing no one escapes and no one fully understands. By turning toward it, you begin to build a relationship with uncertainty. You train yourself to rest in not knowing, and that skill changes everything. Because every anxious thought is a protest against uncertainty. But if you've learned to sit with death, you've learned to sit with life exactly as it is. There are gentle ways to practice cemetery contemplation without sitting in a charnel ground. You can reflect each day. This body will age, weaken, and die. It cannot be otherwise. You can walk through a cemetery, not to mourn, but to remember. You can look in the mirror and see your body not as something to fix, but as something passing, and therefore precious. You can sit quietly and feel your breath, knowing that one day it will stop. These reflections are not about sadness. They are about intimacy with truth. They strip away distraction. They help you see what's beneath the habits, the roles, the fears, what's left when all the pretending ends, and often what's left is love. Because when you realize time is short, you love better. You say what you mean. You reach out first. You let go of pride. You see people as fragile, not annoying. You stop delaying joy. You stop holding back. Death teaches urgency. Not the urgency to rush, but the urgency to live fully now. You begin to notice how many fears fade in the light of mortality. Fear of embarrassment, fear of not being enough, fear of being misunderstood. These are real, but they start to feel less important, because compared to dying with regret, a little discomfort doesn't seem so serious. And in the same breath, you begin to treasure the ordinary. The sound of the wind, the softness of someone's hand, the laughter that wasn't planned. These things stop being background noise. They become sacred, not because they last, but because they don't. The practice also shifts how you relate to your own suffering. When pain arises, you remember, this too will pass. When grief stays, you know it belongs, because everything that ends deserves to be mourned. You stop needing every moment to feel good. You start letting every moment be enough. In this way, death is not the end of peace. It is the beginning. It cuts through illusion like nothing else. It shows you what anxiety tried to hide, that you were never meant to hold it all, that you don't have to outrun time, that you can live deeply even while knowing you will die. And strangely, this awareness of death often leads to more joy, because now you're not waiting for a perfect life. You're not putting off happiness until things settle down. You're not spending your days rehearsing the worst. You're awake, alive, here. The mind doesn't need to push away death to find peace. It can include it, welcome it as part of the truth. And in doing so, it stops resisting life. Each breath is a reminder. Not one is guaranteed, but each one is a gift. And knowing that, really knowing it, is what makes peace possible. So you live with your eyes open. You love with your heart open. You walk this life not trying to escape the end, but letting the end give meaning to each step. And when you do this, the fear begins to loosen. The anxiety begins to fall quiet. Not because the unknown is gone, but because you've stopped pretending you're supposed to control it. This is what the cemetery teaches. Not despair, not fear, but honesty. And through honesty, freedom. Because when nothing is held forever, everything becomes enough. When death is no longer pushed away, when impermanence becomes a truth you live with rather than resist, something opens within you. What once felt urgent loses its grip. The noise of wanting, proving, defending, it begins to fade. But even with this deep clarity, one force still pulls the mind back into restlessness more than almost anything else. Speech. Not just what we say out loud, but the constant verbal energy that moves through thought, reaction, and commentary. Words are powerful, and without awareness, they scatter the mind before we even notice. In Buddhist practice, there's something called noble silence. It's not just the absence of speaking, it's a complete withdrawal from unnecessary verbal energy. A conscious step into stillness where speech no longer leads the mind, and the mind no longer depends on expression to feel real. This kind of silence doesn't suppress, it clarifies. Most people speak to feel in control, to fill space, to reduce discomfort, to feel heard, but very often speech is used not for truth, but to escape what's arising internally. Conversations turn into distraction, arguments turn into identity defense, advice turns into subtle self-importance. Even helpful words can be laced with attachment when they're said to keep the mind from sitting quietly with itself. Noble silence offers something else entirely. It strips away the noise that keeps the mind running in circles. It allows you to watch your inner world without having to comment on it, without needing to explain or be understood. And in that quiet, you begin to see how much of your anxiety is fueled by words, spoken or unspoken. You don't need to live in a monastery to practice noble silence. It begins with awareness. You start noticing how often you speak out of habit, how quickly you rush to respond, how often you fill space with commentary that doesn't need to be said. You begin to listen more, to pause before speaking, to feel the impulse to speak and choose restraint, not out of repression, but out of wisdom. When silence becomes intentional, you start to notice how speech shapes thought. how even the act of preparing to speak creates tension in the body. The mind anticipates, plans, rehearses, defends. These micro-movements of inner speech keep the nervous system slightly activated all day long. Noble silence interrupts this loop. It gives the mind permission to stop building its identity through words. There's a profound stillness that arises when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop responding just to be seen, when you allow experience to be what it is, without comment or conclusion. This doesn't make you distant. It makes you present. The less you speak, the more you hear, not just externally, but internally. You start to hear what's underneath the noise, the layers of feeling, the quiet signals, the subtle truths that are drowned out by constant speech. In silence, mental clarity becomes possible. Thoughts slow down. You begin to recognize patterns. You see how much of what you say is based on anxiety, filling space so others won't feel uncomfortable, or so you won't feel invisible. When this speech is paused, your nervous system finally gets a break. The mind, no longer pushed to translate every moment into language, begins to settle. This doesn't mean becoming mute. It means becoming wise. You speak when it's helpful, when it's necessary, when it brings connection or clarity. But you no longer feel the need to fill every space. You stop fearing silence in a conversation. You stop explaining your emotions before you've even understood them. You stop talking to prove you belong. Practicing verbal restraint helps cultivate presence. Every word becomes a choice. You learn to speak slowly, not to be dramatic, but to be intentional. You become aware of the energy behind your words. Are you speaking from fear, from impatience, from a need to be praised, or from clarity, care, truth? This level of attention to speech trains the mind to observe before it reacts, to respond from stillness rather than speed. There is also a social effect. When you practice noble silence, even part of the time, you become a different kind of presence in others' lives. You become someone who listens deeply, who doesn't interrupt, who allows silence in a conversation without making it awkward. And in doing so, you give others the space to be honest too. You begin to notice that most arguments don't come from difference, but from reaction. One word triggers another. One tone invites defense. One assumption fuels misunderstanding. Verbal restraint breaks that chain. It gives space. It allows temperature to cool. And when you do speak, people listen, because they know your words are chosen, not impulsive. This discipline also protects your energy. So much exhaustion comes from unnecessary speech, from performing, from retelling your stress all day, from over-explaining your feelings, from defending decisions that need no defense. Verbal restraint teaches you to trust the quiet, that not every thought must be said, that not every emotion must be explained to be valid. Over time, silence begins to feel safe, not empty, not lonely, but sacred. You learn to rest inside it, not as a way to hide, but as a way to return. The inner commentary begins to slow, the narrative softens. You become more aware of direct experience, sound, sensation, breath, space. Awareness stops running and starts resting. You may notice how the urge to speak comes with anxiety, a quickening of thought, a tightening in the chest, a rush of emotion. When you see this, you can pause, not to hold back your truth, but to make sure it's spoken with clarity, not urgency. Speech is a tool. Noble silence teaches you when to use it and when to put it down. Even in meditation, the mind uses speech, silent monologues, internal judgments, imaginary conversations. These are all forms of inner speech. Restraint doesn't mean suppression. It means noticing the momentum and gently stepping back, choosing not to follow, resting in the gap between thought and word. That gap is where insight lives. As silence deepens, so does self-awareness. You see how much of your identity is wrapped in language, the way you describe yourself, the stories you tell, the roles you perform. When this language slows, you begin to see yourself more clearly, not as a story, but as awareness itself, simple, unnamed, at peace. You may also notice how speech inflates the sense of self, how saying my opinion, my success, my problem keeps reinforcing a narrative that feeds anxiety. Silence softens that. You don't stop existing. You just stop clinging. You stop narrating every movement and start inhabiting it instead. Noble silence is not about becoming cold or withdrawn. It's about becoming more connected, but without the need for noise. Connection that comes from presence, not performance. From shared space, not shared analysis. You learn that understanding often arises more from listening than from speaking, that healing often happens more in stillness than in discussion. You don't have to live in silence to practice it. You can begin in small ways. A few hours without casual conversation, a walk without your phone, a meal eaten in quiet awareness, a pause before responding to a question. These moments teach the nervous system that it's safe not to perform, that you can be without explaining. This kind of silence also brings emotional clarity. When you stop talking, feelings have space to surface. Sometimes what rises is discomfort, restlessness, sadness, vulnerability. But in silence, these emotions can be felt without narrative, without needing to justify or fix. They come, they peak, they pass, and you remain. Even in relationships, silence can be powerful. It teaches you how to be with someone without constantly reacting, how to listen without planning your reply, how to support without controlling. When you speak less, you feel more, you give more space to others, and you discover that words are not the only way to care. There is a quiet power in not needing to fill space, in not needing to be the loudest voice, in not needing to offer answers. This is where wisdom begins. It's not always about having the right words. It's about knowing when words are not needed. In noble silence, your mind learns to trust itself. Not the thinking mind, but the awareness underneath. It learns that it doesn't need to rehearse every conversation. It doesn't need to defend every action. It doesn't need to speak to feel worthy. This shift creates peace. Not because life gets easier, but because your mind stops adding so much noise to it. You begin to meet life with fewer words and more presence, fewer reactions and more understanding. And slowly, over time, this silence moves with you. It stays behind your words when you speak. It holds your awareness when you listen. It becomes a quiet foundation, steady and clear. The world around you may stay noisy, but inside you've found something different. A silence that is not empty, but full of life. A quiet that is not lonely, but deeply connected. a mind that no longer needs to speak to be free, when words no longer race ahead of experience, when silence becomes a space rather than a gap to fill, the mind slows down in a way that is not dull but alive. Speech no longer drags the mind in 10 directions, and something deeper begins to come into focus. Even without speaking, thought still moves. Even when silent, the mind continues to produce reactions, judgments, stories. The question becomes, where do these thoughts begin? What sets them in motion? And why do they seem to lead again and again into stress, worry, fear? The Buddha described a map, a cycle, a chain of events that gives birth to all forms of suffering. It is not random, it unfolds in a precise sequence. One link triggers the next, feeding a loop that runs beneath awareness. This is dependent origination. It shows not just what suffering is, but how it forms, how it builds, and how to interrupt it. It begins not with thought, but with ignorance. Not ignorance as stupidity, but as a lack of clear seeing. Ignorance here means not knowing things as they really are. Not seeing impermanence, not recognizing the absence of a fixed self, not understanding that everything is arising from conditions. With this not knowing, the mind begins to construct a world based on misunderstanding. From ignorance comes formations, mental habits, emotional tendencies, impulses shaped by past actions. These are the patterns that operate without conscious intention. They're the leanings of the mind toward worry, toward control, toward resistance. Formations move quickly and quietly. They form the background of personality, of habits, of reactions that feel automatic. Then comes consciousness, the awareness that arises based on these formations. It's not general awareness, but a specific, conditioned consciousness shaped by what has come before. If the formations are based in fear, consciousness meets the world already colored by anxiety. What is noticed, what is missed, what is emphasized, all of it is influenced by what consciousness is primed to find. Next is name and form, the mental and physical components of experience. This is how the mind divides the world. Feelings, perceptions, intentions, the body itself, all given names, labels, categories. This structuring creates the sense of a solid self inside a solid world. But it's all based on process, not permanence. Still, once this structure is built, everything that follows builds upon it. Then the 6 sense bases arise: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. These are the gateways through which the world enters. Without them, experience cannot take shape. They are not passive. They are active processes shaping what is received and how it's received. And because they are rooted in conditioned consciousness, they do not see neutrally. They see what the mind is already leaning toward. With the sense bases in place, contact happens. This is the meeting point between the sense organ, the object, and the consciousness. A sight is seen, a sound is heard, a thought arises. Contact is the spark. It's the ignition of experience, and from that contact, feeling arises. Feeling is not emotion. Feeling in this teaching means pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every moment of contact produces one of these tones. This happens before thinking, before meaning, before story. It's immediate, and This simple tone becomes the seed of craving. If the feeling is pleasant, craving reaches out. If unpleasant, craving tries to push away. If neutral, craving searches for something else to feel. Craving is not just wanting, it is the desire to control experience, to hold on to what feels good, to avoid what feels bad, to fill the space when nothing feels like enough. Craving feeds restlessness. It creates the hunger that keeps the mind moving. From craving comes clinging, the moment when desire becomes attachment, not just wanting, but needing. Clinging attaches to ideas, people, outcomes, roles. It turns passing sensations into identity. Clinging takes the thought, "I feel anxious," and turns it into, "I am anxious." This tightens the sense of self and makes suffering feel personal and permanent. Clinging leads to becoming, the formation of a particular state of mind or way of being. This is where identity solidifies. You don't just feel fear, you become the fearful one. You don't just experience thought, you become the thinker. Becoming is the internal build-up of momentum, setting the conditions for future experience. And that leads to birth. In this context, birth doesn't only mean physical birth. It means the birth of selfhood in a specific form, the arising of a new mental world, a new role, a new fixation. Each moment of becoming gives rise to a sense of self being reborn again and again, not just across lifetimes, but across hours and days. Each new worry is a new birth of the anxious self. Each argument is the birth of the angry self. Each grasping thought is a whole identity being constructed again. And with birth comes aging and death, not just physically, but the inevitable passing away of every state we've clung to. What is born must dissolve, what is held must be lost. This is where sorrow arises, not because loss is wrong, but because it is resisted. The cycle completes, only to begin again. And anxiety is the tension created by living inside this loop without seeing it. Each link conditions the next, and the loop moves fast. A single moment of discomfort spirals through the whole chain before there's time to notice. But once it's seen, even a small break in the chain creates space, and that space changes everything. Awareness breaks the chain. When ignorance is replaced with understanding, the loop doesn't complete. When feeling is noticed without reaction, craving doesn't follow. When craving arises and is met with mindfulness, clinging softens. When clinging loosens, becoming slows. When becoming slows, identity becomes fluid, and in that fluidity, suffering loses its foundation. This is not about controlling each link, it's about seeing them arise, watching their movement, understanding their connection. You start to catch moments earlier, before the full narrative forms, before the emotions solidify. You notice that craving has already started to reach. You pause, you stay, you feel the pull, but you don't follow it. And in that refusal to follow, the chain weakens. You begin to experience life as unfolding conditions, not as fixed events. The mind starts to trust impermanence rather than fear it, because now it sees nothing arises without causes, nothing stays without support, nothing ends without freedom becoming possible. Dependent origination is not a belief. It is a description of experience. Every anxious thought has a beginning. Every spiral has a trigger. Every fear has a structure. The practice is to slow down enough to see it, not to avoid the chain, but to meet it with awareness at each step. When you feel discomfort and immediately reach for distraction, dependent origination is unfolding. When you sense judgment rising and notice the urge to defend yourself, the cycle is in motion. When you feel tired and begin to create stories of failure, the pattern is moving. But if you pause, feel, observe, you create a break. That break is the space where suffering ends. This teaching also shifts your view of self. You see that you are not a solid thing moving through time, but a constantly recreating process. You are not the fixed thinker of anxious thoughts. You are the unfolding of conditions. And when the conditions change, the experience changes. This insight softens identity, and that softening reduces fear. Because what fears death the most is the self that believes it is permanent. What fears uncertainty the most is the self that believes it must stay in control. But when self is seen as a process, fear loses its foundation, not because you become numb, but because you become wise. Dependent origination helps you stop blaming yourself for your suffering. It replaces shame with understanding. You see the pattern, not the failure. You see the process, not the flaw. And this shift turns judgment into curiosity. It makes the inner world a place of exploration, not condemnation. This teaching also brings compassion. When you see how suffering forms, you stop taking others' reactions personally. You recognize the same cycle in them. You hear someone speak harshly, and you see the clinging beneath it. You feel someone pull away, and you see the fear of loss driving them. This doesn't excuse harm, but it helps you respond with care rather than resentment. The teaching of dependent origination brings humility. You realize how much of your behavior has been automatic, how much of your reaction has been inherited. And instead of collapsing into guilt, you begin to step into responsibility, the kind that starts with seeing clearly and ends with choosing wisely. You start interrupting the cycle where you can. You feel tension and choose breath instead of distraction. You notice craving and choose presence over grasping. You sense clinging and let the feeling pass without naming it. These moments are small, but they build. Each one weakens the loop. Each one opens the heart. The freedom offered by this teaching is not an idea. It is the direct result of seeing the pattern and stepping out of it, not once, but again and again, until the habit of suffering fades, until the reflex to grasp dissolves, until the fear of experience is replaced by the wisdom of impermanence. And what's left is not emptiness. It's peace. A peace that doesn't depend on everything going right. A peace that arises because you no longer need to run. Because you know how suffering begins, and you know how to let it end. Quietly, gently, one link at a time. When you begin to see how suffering is built, how each reaction feeds the next, how craving becomes clinging and clinging becomes becoming, there's a moment where the mind naturally pauses. You've seen enough of the pattern to know that continuing the cycle is optional. But even when wisdom is present, the body often still carries the momentum of the past. Thoughts may be recognized as empty, but they continue moving. Energy still swirls. Restlessness still vibrates through your chest or spine or shoulders. And no matter how clear your insight, sometimes what the mind understands, the body still needs time to release. This is where walking becomes not just movement, but medicine. In the Thai forest tradition, walking meditation is not a break from stillness. It is a deepening of it. It is a bridge between silence and activity, a place where mindfulness finds its footing. This form of practice takes the awareness cultivated in sitting and weaves it directly into movement, breath, and the world around you. It grounds insight in motion and steadies attention through rhythm. When practiced consistently, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for interrupting obsessive thought and restoring clarity to a cluttered mind. The practice is deceptively simple. You select a straight path, 5 to 10 meters long, natural and unforced. You walk back and forth slowly, with full presence. The eyes rest gently ahead, not focused, but open. The hands come together lightly or rest naturally. The steps are not exaggerated or mechanical. They follow a normal pace, just a little slower than usual. The attention rests on the sensations in the feet, on the feeling of lifting, moving, placing, touching. Each step becomes the object of awareness, not to block thought, but to return from it. The mind will wander. It will chase unfinished conversations, pending decisions, unresolved emotions. When it does, you don't correct it with force. You simply notice and return. The next step is always there, waiting, grounding, real. The rhythm of walking offers a structure the mind can rest in. Obsessive thoughts often arise from unstructured space. The mind fills the unknown with projections. It loops, but walking gives the nervous system just enough input to feel safe, while also leaving space for awareness to settle. It's a practice of returning again and again to something reliable. Contact, pressure, shifting, releasing. You might begin by labeling lifting, moving, placing, or left, right, left, right. But as mindfulness deepens, even the words drop away. You just feel. You stay with sensation, the warmth of the foot, the pull of the muscles, the slight sway of balance. You begin to discover that walking, when done with full awareness, becomes a complete meditation object, not less than the breath, equal to it. When the body is engaged and the mind is watching, a different kind of concentration arises, one that includes the senses, one that keeps you awake yet relaxed. Especially when mental energy is high or sitting feels agitating, walking can stabilize the mind in a way that no other posture can. It gives movement to restless energy without feeding the thinking mind. This practice also supports continuity. Often we meditate in fragments, sitting here, breathing there, returning to distraction all day. Walking bridges those fragments. It brings mindfulness into transition, into action. It teaches that awareness is not tied to stillness. It can move, it can walk, it can continue. The Thai forest monks often practice walking for hours each day, not to escape, but to deepen. They use it as a container, as a space where thoughts are allowed to appear without being believed. In walking, thoughts have room to rise and fall without being acted on. There's no need to suppress them. You walk with them. You allow them to pass. There is also emotional wisdom in this form of movement. Feelings stored in the body, frustration, sadness, tension, begin to unwind through the gentle repetition of steps. You don't need to process them with words. The body processes through movement, through rhythm, through presence. Each step allows release, not always dramatically but subtly, like water finding its level. As the mind settles into the steps, time begins to change. Minutes feel longer, but not in a burdensome way. The pressure to rush fades. The need to arrive disappears. There is just this moment, this foot, this ground. Awareness sharpens, sounds become clearer, the wind touches your skin more fully. You feel alive, not because anything special is happening, but because for once, nothing is being missed. The practice also strengthens equanimity. Thoughts will come. Some may be intense, but you learn not to stop for them. You don't chase them or run from them. You let them be. Just as you walk, you let the mind do what it does without giving it control. This trains a powerful form of non-attachment. One step at a time. Thought arises. Step. Emotion swells. Step. Memory appears. Step. Over time, this becomes more than just a practice session. It becomes a way of walking through life. Each transition, each routine moment, becomes a space for mindfulness to enter. The walk from the kitchen to the bedroom, the path from the car to the front door. These moments become invitations to return. You may also begin to sense the energetic balance of walking meditation. When the mind is dull, walking brings alertness. When the mind is overactive, walking brings steadiness. When emotions are overwhelming, walking creates space. It helps digest the experience of being alive without being overwhelmed by it. It is not a tool to avoid stillness, but to support it. The more mindful you are in walking, the more depth you find in sitting. The more you integrate attention into movement, the less the body pulls attention away when you rest. It becomes a cycle of support. Sitting refines, walking steadies. Together, they create balance. Walking meditation also reconnects you to the earth, not just as a concept, but as a direct experience. Each step becomes a reminder. You are supported. You are grounded. You belong. The earth holds your weight without question. The body knows how to move. Awareness knows how to meet it. Nothing is missing. You may find insights rising during walking that never appear during sitting. Something about the forward motion allows space for understanding, not through analysis, but through felt sense knowing. You walk with a question, and the body answers, not in words, but in ease, in letting go. There is also healing in repetition. When a mind has been traumatized, it seeks patterns to feel safe. Walking meditation gives a gentle, predictable rhythm. No surprises, no demands, just step after step, a soft reconditioning of safety. This is not a bypass of deep pain, but a stable container in which it can be held. For those caught in chronic thinking, walking can become a reset, a chance to stop spiraling, to break the loop not by force, but by redirecting attention. The body doesn't need to be convinced. It just needs to be included. And the moment you feel your feet again, the mind begins to settle. Over time, walking becomes more than practice. It becomes refuge, a way to come home to yourself in the middle of chaos, a way to return without needing a cushion or a special time. Just a path, just your steps, just awareness, moving with the body. You begin to notice that each step is complete. that nothing is missing when you are truly there, that even in movement, peace is possible, that even in transition, stability exists. In a world that pushes for faster, walking asks you to slow down. In a culture that values output, walking reminds you of being. In a mind that overthinks, walking returns you to presence, not with effort, but with rhythm, not with concepts, but with sensation, not with force, but with feet. You don't need to fix your mind before you start. You only need to walk. The ground will hold you, the body will guide you, and awareness, patient and quiet, will meet you step by step. This is how the loop breaks. Not all at once, but one step at a time, mind moving with body, thought resting in presence. Nothing pushed away, nothing clung to. Just walking, just now, just this. There's something deeply honest about walking with yourself. No pretending, no performing, no escaping into thought. Just the ground, the body, and the return to what is real. And as the steps continue, as thoughts lose their hold, you begin to feel something more primal, more ancient, stirring in the quiet. Not more thinking, but something deeper. Sound,